It isn't very rare that once in a while, often when you least expect it, you come across a movie that you're instantly sold on the moment you see it. Everything from the trailers to the premise to the types of characters, right down to the way it looks and sounds at first. And then when you get to actually watching it, it turns out to be a movie that you really like. I want to take a bit of your time today to talk about one such film I've watched recently, and why I think it's so worth mentioning that I'd go as far as to honor it with the title of peak for an entire medium of film. However few of these peaks in animation we've gotten in recent times. Meet Flow. You've probably heard of it at this point, and well, if you haven't, you're welcome. Flow is a 2024 animated movie about a cat's journey through a flood-devastated world and all these other animals that hop on the same boat. First premiered at the 2024 Cannes Film Festival. I don't know if I said that right. First premiered at the 2024 Cannes Film Festival, and from director Gintz Zilbalodis, everyone who really saw this movie just knew it was something special. It went ahead to break several Latvian film records and has been receiving positive acclaim after positive acclaim since release. Obviously, I'm hopeful it becomes even more widespread and celebrated in the coming months, because I believe it deserves all of it. I mean, I wouldn't be making this video otherwise. There's just so many aspects of this movie that come together so well. I'll just start with the most obvious ones. Mind you, I'll be going into some major plot points and themes, so feel free to hold off watching this review until you've seen the movie. If you're not too keen on spoilers, that is. That said, on with it. There aren't any people left in the world of Flow, and no explanation as to why that is. We can only tell from what we're shown that there used to be people. The present day is full of the rich culture and art they left behind, of houses and wood statues, and all these structures that are tell of a civilization that once was. We don't get to see any signs of war, famine, drought, or any other significant disasters that could have led to a mass extinction. It's as if they just vanished. I should be revisiting this point later on in the review, but obviously, since there aren't any humans left, there also isn't any verbal dialogue throughout the film. Now, you should know, zero verbal dialogue in a movie isn't exactly something I score extra points for. I don't think most of you would do this either. Some really good ones from not too long ago that I can think of are WALL-E, A Quiet Place, and this one episode from Love, Death and Robots. All great depictions of speechless film done well, but only the LDR one actually has zero verbal dialogue, or partly because the main character was deaf. And with any of these, you find that the absence of verbal dialogue shifts the focus medium to rely more heavily on visual storytelling. And if you've watched this movie, you'll know the visual storytelling here was peak. With animation, filmmakers are always at the liberty of exaggerating expressions and movements of the characters to better convey emotion or narrative. Most of animation is fictional or fantastical anyways, so fits, I guess. But when you shift the aim to the depicting of reality instead, especially with characters that aren't human, then I think it just works better if there isn't any talking. We've seen how uncanny valley things can become when animation tries too hard to blend realism with fantasy, what were like Disney's Lion King remakes and a ton of others. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And with the visual storytelling in Flow, I feel like a lot of the narrative was grounded in reality, yet still managed to create its own unique feel. What with the matte aesthetic and more desaturated colors, the way shadows interacted with light as if it were in layers, or how bushes and shrubs would sometimes look more like fur than actual blades of grass, how the fur itself could look completely smoothed out at times, and just the general ethereal vibe of the way the animation looks. Now, I understand some of that can be attributed to how the final renders were done with Blender's real-time rendering engine, Eevee, instead of going for the higher fidelity and more time-consuming cycles engine. But at the same time, I also don't think it was unintentional, because more and more animated movies these days are starting to look like this. Call it the renaissance of animation, if you will. I'm here for all of it. So, short of the matter is, in terms of visuals, the animation in this movie was truly fascinating. The water, the skies, the trees, the landscapes. Notwithstanding the budget, notwithstanding the animation software, this genuinely was some of the best animation I've seen recently. Right on par with the production quality from the bigger, more achieved animation studios like Pixar or DreamWorks. Always extra points if the thing that you're watching is actually appealing to watch and not just witty storytelling. Plus, the expression of the characters themselves here was really impressive. Not one time do I remember watching the movie and getting confused with what was going on. With some scenes, I couldn't help but pause and just appreciate how seamlessly I was being shown exactly what was needed to be conveyed. And I like to think to this particular scene whenever I say this. A lot of the expression is helped with the characters themselves being animals most of us are already familiar with, and those animals then being voiced by their real-life counterparts. I mean, most people have had a pet cat or pet dog in their lives before. Know exactly what they sound like, how they move and interact with surroundings, or their mannerisms. I don't think the same can be said for like deer or hippos or even camels. Although I now suspect Gintz Zilbalodis and his team could make even that work out into another masterpiece. And talking about camels, the capybara wasn't voiced by the actual animal, because, well, capybara sounds don't exactly match the personality the animators were going for, so instead, they chose to go with baby camel noises. Neatly executed in my opinion. Watching this movie, I got the feeling that these characters were more emotionally and psychologically evolved than they would be in real life. Mostly because there were several moments of reflection and self-awareness that I didn't think animals could have. I mean, cats and rodents understanding how steering a boat works, lemurs showing strong attachment to such material things as tin cans and jewelry, such simple looking birds yet such complex systems of authority and punishment. You get the point. The world building and character choices here are pretty interesting in that not only are the characters mildly anthropomorphic, there also aren't any humans to interact with these animals and elicit their responses in the way we're familiar with. Like the director himself said, these characters reflect his own life and personal experiences in a way.
Other animals, and the cat has to overcome two of his fears. One is the water, and the other is kind of working together with others. It's quite a personal story actually, because it's the first time I'm working with a team myself. I used to do films just by myself, and I also had to learn how to work together in a team, just like the cat's kind of a story about making the film itself.
And I think most of us can relate. The cat's fears and aversions are the focus of the film's narrative. So, two fears mentioned, fear of water and the fear of accepting company. These two we've seen depicted pretty well, where in the beginning, the cat would self-isolate and run away from anything it deemed a threat. If you've owned cats before, you'll know this is true for them, especially if they used to be stray. In a way, I've always thought it was like they believed the world revolved around them, that everything was out to get them. Very much like main character syndrome in real life. And yes, I'm aware how silly this sounds, but it's only when we go out into the real world and see for ourselves how everyone else is just trying to live their own life and do their own things to survive that we're able to overcome this fear. And that applies to most of us, I guess. As for the fear of water, it may interest you to know that cats aren't born with it. Matter of fact, cats are natural born swimmers. And some breeds of household cats even tend to enjoy swimming as an activity. They mostly develop an aversion to it following a previous incident with water, or just, their evolutionary history. In the movie, the fear of water is pretty central to the narrative. And there's also something that the cat overcoming would signify a major point in the character arc. The fear of water and the fear of association are alike in that they both represent a fear of the unknown, of leaving a comfort zone and venturing into chance. And I just really appreciate it when lots of thought is put into characters like this, because these are issues that not just Gintz Zilbalodis alone struggles with, and that a lot of us in the audience actually relate to. The idea of putting ourselves out there and allowing ourselves to connect with others, allowing ourselves to feel uncomfortable, that's just how we grow, how we evolve our own character arcs. Heck, we're all in the same boat after all, so there is indeed something to pick up here. And where the cat is the one that started out afraid of associating with other animals and afraid of the unknown, the dog on the other hand was the complete opposite. Our dog in particular is a Labrador Retriever, a breed known for their intelligence, loyalty and playfulness. In the words of Gintz Zilbalodis himself,
because I didn't want to have this didactic, simple message that being independent is bad and working together is good, because we also have this dog character in the film who is on this opposite journey as the cat. So it was important to show that the truth is somewhere in the middle.
This particular character arc can probably be summed up with 3 scenes, where in the first one, the dog sees something unusual and unfamiliar, and the obvious curiosity takes over. The instinct then would be to explore that unknown, yet our retriever only reacts when the other dogs start barking, and is even the last to give chase. Cut to this scene where the 4 other dogs have been allowed to join the boat and are already causing much trouble. The cat throws an accusatory glance at him as if saying, "What the heck is wrong with them?" To which the retriever responds with, "What? I didn't do anything." It's a tiny bit of interaction, yes, but how easily it manages to draw meaning and understanding is mighty tell of how seamless the expression in this movie is. Even without any dialogue, the cat then proceeds to climb to the top of the mast on instinct, back to being alone and safe where no one else can reach. And we kind of see it pause to question everything it's learned to trust thus far, and whether it should have been so accepting of others after all. At the same time, the dog is also realizing how there are certain boundaries when trying to coexist with other animals. How following your instincts to explore the unknown isn't always the correct thing to do. We even see him do his little to try to fix things. And cut to the 3rd scene and final point in the arc, where the cat and the capybara are stuck on this tree after the floodwater cleared. All the other animals are trying to pull the boat to safety, and they're all pretty much dedicated to this. Well, that is until a rabbit comes running past, and the 4 troublesome dogs give in to their instincts and choose to go after it. With the lives of his friends on the line, the retriever on the other hand chooses to stay and help, and they manage to pull the boat close enough just in time before the tree breaks loose and falls into the chasm. And if you look at how these 2 character arcs are posed, how they sort of conflict with each other, it becomes clear that the truth to these issues lies somewhere in the middle, and that it's up to you to find the balance that works for you. With the capybara, even I was okay with the moment it was introduced. Calm, peaceful, bit diplomatic. How can you not like a character like that? I mean, it kinda reminds me of the chill guy meme, even though that one's a dog, apparently. So it made sense that this was the first character that the cat had to learn to trust, because from the first encounter, both sides realized immediately how neither was a threat. And you know, what with the cat being a cat and the capybara being the world's largest rodent, yeah, that absolutely works. It may also interest you to know that the capybara was the only main character that had a flat character arc, and by that I mean his was the only character that ended the film the same way they started, because he's always just been a chill guy. Out of all the main characters, the lemur was the one that puzzled me the most, because I can't help but wonder, why would seemingly an entire animal species be so fixated and attached to man-made things? Like, this bugs my mind. Being a primate, and thus among the closest living animal relatives of man. I think animating expressions with this particular character would have been a lot easier for the team because it could get away with being more human-like, as we see with scenes like this one. And there's a kind of goofy feel about the chippiness and the way it moves and the eye gestures, just that tinge of humor the story needed. That I think the lemur scenes were probably some of the funniest we got, however few of those there were. The secretary bird, I think, was the deepest character of the bunch, and by that, I mean the character arc that had the most depth and thought put into it. The very first time we see one after the flood started, the bird had caught a fish that it was giving to its chicks. Not long after, the cat was snatched up by another secretary bird that tried to fly away with it, probably to feed its young as well. And in the scene where our main secretary bird gave a fish to the cat, who was rather incompetent at hunting for himself at the time, the other secretary bird snatched up the fish and threw it to a chick, as if implying that they were only allowed to feed their own, and that no one else mattered. And from the moment our secretary bird actually stood up for the cat and got one of his wings broken, I couldn't help but attribute a sort of motherly figure to it, because in a way, it did for the cat what the other birds would only do for their young. It's even more evident when you consider how this was the character that did most of the steering competently, wasn't one to shy away from responsibility, was always calm and calculated, didn't hold any grudges, and actually cared about the well-being of the other animals, specifically the cat, even though it tried to hide it. And not to forget what was undoubtedly the most moving scene of the film, the one where it ascended into the heavens from the curious-looking Spires. I'll speak more on this in a bit, but overall, this definitely was my favorite character of the bunch. There's 3 themes from the movie that I'd like to quickly touch on before wrapping up my review. With the first one, the theme of balance in how we interact with people, and thus the balance in learning to keep to ourselves versus learning to trust others, I think we've spoken quite enough about already. Number 2 would then be the theme of spirituality, which is something that is very gently integrated into the film, for one that's purposely designed for the audience to explore and interpret in their own ways, without so much of holding your hand to walk you through the film. There were a couple of elements from the story that didn't quite fit in with the rest, most of which was intentional. Let's talk about the whale for a bit. Considering how much effort was put into making all the characters look, sound, and behave like their real-life counterparts, everything was just off with this one. First, it doesn't quite fit the description for a whale, because as you may already know, whales are mammals, not fish, and so have blowholes for breathing, instead of gills. Matter of fact, none of its anatomy resembles any known whales, so there were massive design changes with this particular character. But why? Well, it appears the intention was to make the whale more frightening and intimidating at first, since it was directly tied with the cat's development throughout the film. But granted, I don't exactly see the frightening. I think majestic would be more befitting. Anyways, the whale didn't only feel out of place as a character visually, it also kind of gave the vibe of a highly aware and highly sentient being, and a protector of sorts. Because if we go back to the beginning, where the cat was stuck on top of the sculpture while the water level kept rising, or when the cat almost drowned and was sinking to the bottom, or even when the boat's sail got stuck in a tree, it seemed the whale was always there exactly when it needed to be. Revisiting the original inspiration for Flow, which is a short animated film from 2012, also by Gintz Zilbalodis, that basically has the same biblical flood story and the same main character, it's no surprise how some of Flow's scenes are basically one-on-one reenactments. Like this scene where the cat falls into the water and almost drowns, or this one where after learning to swim, the cat could finally fish for itself. Where in Flow, it's the whale that saves the cat from drowning. In Aqua, it's the bird that dives into the water and pulls it out. It even has the courtesy to drop the cat right above the boat, just like we see happen in Flow. And even though there wasn't an ascension scene in Aqua, the bird was still portrayed like some ethereal, otherworldly protector, somewhat symbolic of a guardian angel, and it's just kind of the same vibe I get from the whale. There's also a post-credit scene for Flow that a lot of us missed the first time watching, that shows the whale surfacing from the ocean, signifying that it somehow managed to return to its natural habitat after the floodwaters cleared. And I get it, early on in the film, we saw a boat on a tree even before the floodwaters came, so it's probably happened before. Who's to say it didn't happen again just in time to save the whale from dehydration and all of that crushing weight? There may even be several other ways to explain this scene. The film is open to interpretation, so who is also to say that this scene wasn't the whale attaining a higher peace? That just like the secretary bird, it too ascended to a heaven where the waves would always be gentle and unchanging against a setting sun, a reward for all of its acts of kindness to other animals. If you remember, we did hear it draw its final breaths at the end of the film after all, and considering the other fan theories for the post-credit scene, this would be the most compelling one. Still on spirituality, the tall spires from the ascension scene were always a place of interest since early on in the film. Now, you'd think that in a flood, animals would only need to find something that floats and stay afloat. No direction, no destination, just plain survival instinct. However, from the instant the animals were familiarized with how steering a boat works, almost every turn they made was in the direction of these tall, jagged mountain spires, and not to mention all the other subtle hints to how important this one location was throughout the film. Now, you could say, despite their differences, that the collective intention was to climb to the highest point of land, as that would ensure maximum survival odds, and I wouldn't disagree, survival was the main focus here. However, not one time was any of the animals in disagreement of staying the course, even if it meant they had to navigate a desolate city with complex and narrow pathways, even if they had to go through a literal storm to the point of breaking the tiller, despite the scene being littered with wreckage from like 100 other boats that made it here before them. Why risk so much to come to this place? What was so special about it? Well, a lot more is revealed when the cat and the secretary bird actually make it to the spires. There's lamps, there's housing structures, there's ornamental lines and stone carvings, and even what appears to be a staircase leading all the way to the top. Yeah, all the way to the top. So clearly, this used to be a place of importance to the humans who were here before. And at the top, the secretary bird was just standing there and staring up into the sky, as if it was waiting for something to happen. Considering how much this one location was teased and hinted at throughout the film, it's dang nigh impossible to simply write off as coincidence. This was a place of importance for all creatures. These were spiritual grounds. Understanding some of the finer details like the ascension itself or the post-credit scene was left onto the viewer's own cultural or religious beliefs. And while most movies seem to prefer a more direct and unambiguous approach at depicting spirituality in a way that probably resonates with, say, a particular religion, others like Flow simply presents the audience with an event whose occurrence is irrefutable yet inexplicable, and as such, what most of us attribute to the supernatural. The last theme that I'll be talking about that isn't as easy to catch as the other two is the theme of self-acceptance and self-discovery. And I say this because aside the struggle of accepting company and the fear of water, I think there was a third hurdle that the cat eventually overcame that I haven't seen anyone else mention yet, but that is probably just as important as these other two, that being a struggle with self-identity and self-acceptance. Throughout the movie, the animals we're introduced to are either in pairs or packs or flocks or some other sort of group, leave for a few solitary ones. Yet the cat was probably the only one to give any form of thought to this. I mean, obviously, traveling in a group or having others around that look, sound, and act like you would have helped to enforce a sense of belonging and identity. And that could probably explain why the cat felt so out of place throughout the film, with nothing but these huge inanimate sculptures to go by. If we look to the very first scene of the movie, where we're first introduced to the cat, it's just staring at its own reflection in the water. Same with this scene, same with this one, and this one at the very end of the film. Now, what all these scenes have in common, aside from being exactly the same scene with a different emotion, is that unsettling feeling, or right, if you may, that something was being questioned here, that these scenes were markers in the cat's character arc that just paused to ask something. At times, it felt as if the cat was questioning its own identity, realizing how different it looked from all these other animals, how small it was, or outside all that, how calm water could be, or where the balance in coexistence lay, or on an even more metaphysical level, questioning the purpose of life itself at the end there. And you'd think none of this could possibly be true, that it's just a cat after all. But considering the fact that this cat could dream or have nightmares, and steer a boat, and do all these things that you wouldn't expect from a regular house cat, then the idea of a higher self-awareness and self-discovery probably isn't too far from the truth after all. These are all animal characters, and yet it's so easy to relate to feeling out of place in the world we find ourselves in. When we look at ourselves every day, no matter how much we've adjusted ourselves, no matter how much we've changed with time, life always seems to have something new to throw at us. Most, if not all of us, get these moments of self-reflection, moments where we're the only ones that truly see ourselves, because how we respond to what life throws at us, the paths we decide to take, that is the journey of self-discovery. Flow is such a wonderfully made movie. The world feels lived in, the characters are deep and interesting, and it's just visually peak animation. I guess all that just goes to say it's a masterpiece, one we got from a small team of animators and filmmakers. To them, I cannot say thank you enough for the experience it brought. Truly, this movie deserves all the awards and recognition it can get. And that, dear viewer, will be all for this review. Time was kinda tight on this one because I had a lot on my schedule. I'd very much like to know what you watching this thought about the movie. What scenes moved you the most? Which character you are? What else interested you? And yeah, thanks for watching. Catch you later.